Now we'll continue with this day of the second regional conference on the IPCC Climate Change Knowledge and Solutions Road to COP26. We're transmitting through the corlac.org platform, and you could leave your questions and comments on the page, and also you could have the simultaneous interpretation in real time. So in the panels for certification between Latin America and the Caribbean, unfortunately, we were unable to have one of our guests, Adrian Waman, who is a member of the Community Center Marguasi Piqueros, where thanking the Pachamama is a philosophy of life, and it's part of what we've seen through many years of memory and culture, and that takes even greater importance and relevance nowadays. So from the south of Lake Titicaca, with a great commitment, and he wanted to accompany us, and that's why he sent this video so we could show it to you now. Need to. I send everyone a hug from here, from from the Cados Nation. We're part of Malcoase. I'd like to send everybody a the warmest regards in all four directions. We in the Queveros Nation live at over 4,000 meters above the sea, and we now, in these times before and now, lived in a fertile land full of water, full of wind, full of humidity. As the years go by, we've noticed that we are not really living in those times anymore. When we had a lot of water, perhaps today the water is going down. And when we had wind and fog, perhaps the wind does not blow anymore. So then, dear brothers and sisters of the four directions, let's think about what's happening. Let's put ourselves in the place of what's being affected. How are we going to live if there's no water? If the glaciers, if the mountains lose their water, we're not going to have the clothes and ponchos. What are we going to live from? Let's become aware of this. Let's stop doing things that contaminate and pollute our environment. Let's stop doing things that end water, that terminate fish, and that each live person fulfills that. So, in that sense, we want to change the life that we have, and we want to preserve what our grandparents gave us. Thank you very much, Adrian Guamar, from the Community Center of Manguasi Miqueros, with that kind message that brings us back to our origins and that talks about the planet. A huge hug to Adrian Kaman for that kind message. The IPCC presentations that we have reviewed during these 2 days have referred to the reports, the special reports, and now we're going to get to know other contents elaborated by the IPCC, referring to the cities and climate change refinements of 2019 on guidelines on the greenhouse gas effects, and also we're going to get to know updates on other reports, one that was published or will be published soon, such as the report from Group 1. We'd like to welcome Eduardo Calvo Buendia, who is part of the group of National Laboratories Greenhouse Gas Effects on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Eduardo Calvo is a great scientist and associate professor of Santa Lima, Peru, where he's taught courses on environmental pollution and courses on these aspects focused on clean development, and he's been an advisor on negotiations on climate change between 1996 and 2015. Welcome, Eduardo Calvo. Good morning. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for having invited me today to give this talk, and it's on the other products that IPCC prepared on its sixth evaluation cycle. If we go beyond the special reports that you have had an opportunity of seeing and hearing in the previous meetings, today I'm going to talk about other works that are being carried out during this evaluation cycle. To begin, we're going to talk about what type of products the IPCC creates. We create evaluation reports, special reports, where we've had opportunities of seeing three samples, methodological reports, technical documents, and also documents which are the results of conferences and workshops based on science. And now we're going to talk about other documents without emphasizing the special reports that you've already had an opportunity of seeing. Right then, as you can see here, we always say that knowledge does not use up space, but as you can see, the IPCC, through its 3 decades, has produced enough reports to fill this whole shelf, and these are not all of them. It's a sample. We would still have to include the methodological work volumes that have been created for over 2 decades now. Next. As we can see, the IPCC reports have had a larger input. The first evaluation report led to the establishment of the UN framework on climate change. The second evaluation report was used as an input for the creation of the Kyoto Protocol, and the third evaluation report placed the focus over the impacts of climate change and also the need to have adaptation processes. The fourth report on evaluation from the year 2007, in this case, was decisive to be able to establish the idea that we needed a 2-degree limit, 2 degrees centigrade, and that would be a basis for an agreement beyond the Kyoto Protocol period. And of course, the fifth report, which is still current, has been used as an input for the Paris Accords, as well as the special reports have been used as inputs for the various conferences, such as the case of 1.5 for COP24, and as you've seen for COP25. Next, please. Well then, here we could see in this timeline, how it's gone and what's happened with the highlights we've had throughout the path. But this trajectory is not stopping. It continues towards the conclusion of the sixth report on evaluation. The sixth report on evaluation is going to be approved in the remaining months for 2021, especially during 2022. It will be used as input for the process that has established the framework agreement on climate change by the UN, known from its name in English as the Global Stockade, which has to be finished in 2023, and it will show how we're progressing in the implementation of the Paris Accords. Next. So during this cycle, we've produced these special reports where we've already talked about them in previous days. Furthermore, apart from these three reports, we've prepared this report for the update of the methodology. This has been approved in the city of Kyoto in Japan in May 2019, and its name is the refinement on 2019, expansion on the guidelines of the IPCC 2016 for national inventories on greenhouse gases. Another important milestone in this cycle was that we had a conference on cities during this cycle, and I believe the region that's being developed, the most urban region in the world, like Latin America, this is something that's particularly important. And we also have good news that we're going to create a special report on cities and climate change during the seventh cycle of evaluation. So once again, if we go back to the sixth report, we're going to talk about the products that are expected. And for the year 2021, 2022, we're going to see this group of products, the contributions of the work groups. Work group one on science, on climate change, the second group on impacts, vulnerability, and adaptation, and the third group on the mitigation of climate change. The result of these groups is going to be seen condensed in a report that will be approved in 2022, which is called Summary Report for the sixth evaluation cycle. And this is going to be a great input for the summary of the global stocktake in the year 2023. In these slides, I'm going to present the contents, diverse contents of the reports. For example, the one on refinement 2019 can be found, be it on the website of the IPCC, as the webpage of the inventory work group, even though this group does not have a mandatory character since it was not established by the agreement yet. This represents a great update, a great advancement, and any country that wishes to use it may take full advantage of this in the preparation of their inventories if and when they indicate that this is a document that has already been approved by the IPCC. This report contains a chapter on a general point of view, and it also contains 5 volumes, a volume on general guidelines, and recommendations on reporting, and 4 thematic volumes that are specialized in different areas such as the emissions related to the energy sector, to the industrial processes and product use, and to agriculture, other forestry, and other uses of land, as well as the solid and liquid waste management. All emissions linked to these four great sectors will be able to be reviewed and updated against what was established in 2006. Next. And now we're going to see the various indexes that are held in the report that have been prepared during the sixth evaluation cycle. Case of group one, which is on science, climate change. Here we see an introductory chapter where we're going to see the framework, the context, the methods, a chapter that is going to talk about the how the climate system has changed, the observations, and the third chapter talks about the influence that we're having humans on the climate system, and the fourth is going to talk about the global climate of the future, projections based on scenarios, and what we know in the short term. The fifth chapter is going to talk about the global carbon cycle and other biogeochemical cycles and their feedback. Chapter 6 is going to talk about the climate forests of short lifespan, which we're also going to have an update on methodologically for their inventories during the seventh evaluation cycle. In Chapter 7, we're going to see the budget on energy that the planet has, the climate feedbacks, and also the sensibility or sensitivity of the climate system. In the 8th, we will talk about water cycle changes. Chapter 9, we'll talk about ocean cryosphere and changes in the sea level. 10th is going to be about the linking on the global level with the different regions of the planet. Next one, 11, is going to talk about the extreme events in a context of the climate change. And finally, chapter 12 is going to give us information on climate change, be it for regional impacts and also for the regions at risk.
The work of Working Group 1 will include a novelty product, which we hope will be useful. Next slide, please. Under the Working Group 2, dedicated to oversee the impacts, vulnerability, and adaptation for systems impacted by climate change, we'll see an introductory chapter about where we are and what are the key concepts. And we'll have two main sections. One section about risks, adaptation, and sustainability for systems impacted by climate change. Within this section, all of these aspects will be reviewed for terrestrial, freshwater ecosystems, as well as the ocean and coastal ecosystem and their services. Everything related to water will also be reviewed, food, fiber, and other ecosystem products, also cities, settlements, and other key infrastructures. Chapter 7, health, well-being, and the changing structure of communities will be assessed, and very important, poverty, livelihoods, and sustainable development. Next one, please. In the second section, we'll address the regions. There's precision about a particular chapter for most nations within ECLAC, and that will be chapter 12 for Central and South America. Without undermining, though, that in this chapter there will be information in this section, there will be a very relevant chapter about what is happening in North America and what is happening also in small islands. Undoubtedly, this is very positive. It's very positive to know about other regions, but I emphasize in the regional pertinent ones. Now, regarding the paths to the sustainable development pathways, we'll see how this integrates adaptation and mitigation. We will address the major risks across sectors and regions, as well as the options for decision-making to manage risk, and also the different pathways or roadmaps for development will be reviewed towards a resilient development. Next one, please. The index for working group, or the outline for working group 3 about mitigation to climate change presents a structure on its own, in which the context will be provided in an introductory chapter where trends, forcing trends, and roadmaps will be reviewed to conduct the assessment of emissions. Also, what is happening globally will be reviewed, but then there will be sectoral chapters, and these sectoral chapters, because in our region we have so many countries that produce hydrocarbons, we have the most urbanized region around the world, which of course means building and transport industries and other types of settlements like urban centers. And a very relevant topic will be addressed for many countries, which is agriculture, forestry, and other uses of the land. Of course, there are countries that have a strong industrialization, and all of these demand for cross-sectoral perspectives. An additional topic are the institutional forces on subnational and national policies and institutions, as well as international cooperation. But I would like to highlight that these financial and technological forces are considered by most of our countries as very important. These are related to investments and finances, and also to innovation, development of technology, and also technology transfer. Lastly, There will be a summary chapter where we will try to accelerate transition in the context of sustainable development. Next one, please. To finish, we'll address the synthesis report outline, where, as you can see, is a very compact report of around 50, of around a couple of pages for front matters, and then more pages for, or 10 pages for the summary for policymakers, an introductory section of half a page, another section about the current status and trends of around 10 pages, and a third section where long-term climate and development futures will be addressed in 10 pages. And finally, the near-term responses in a changing climate in 10 pages. This is a very short report which summarizes all of the years of effort and preparation of the working groups. Next one, please. Just like it happens in our region within the IPCC, diversity is our strength. And we can always do better. I think with those words, we can conclude, and I only have to say next. And thank you so much for your attention. I repeat my acknowledgements to the organizers for the invitation. You can see on the last slide all of the contact information and the ways to find us through our website and email accounts, and also through the variety of social media that is available. I won't read all of the slide, but as you can see, we are very present in social media. Thank you and see you soon. We'll continue with the second regional conference on the IPCC, climate change and solutions towards COP26. Remind everyone who's listening that we are broadcasting through corelac.org website, and you can leave us your questions and comments here. Also, let me remind you that we have simultaneous interpretation, and the next panel is called Sea Level Rise and the Effect on Coastal Communities, which seeks to have a dialogue on the loss of biodiversity impacting the environment. Therefore, the quality of life of populations. Climate change has its effect on the health of people as we have been living it for this past year with the pandemic. Now we welcome the panelists that will be moderated by Thelma Krug, Vice President of the IPCC. Thank you, dear Thelma, again for joining us in this panel. We also welcome the panelists. Federico Isla, author of the IPCC with the chapter Ocean and Cryosphere, researcher with CONICET, academic from universities in Spain, Chile, and Argentina. In many cases, he's been a counselor for the Institute of Coasts and Quaternary, and since 2017, he is member of the Institute of Exact Sciences, and since 2002, member of the Science Association, Science of the Sea. Now, also with us is Maximiliano Bello, expert in oceanic international policies, who's worked in the environmental matters for 2 decades to promote the techniques of ocean conservation. He's also worked for non-government organizations both in Chile and the United States. His work in Mission Blue is focused on assuring and elevating the global attempts to marine conservation involving national and international organizations to care for their own waters and promote marine conservation in several international multilateral forums. Welcome. At the moment, attempting to connect is Bairoa Ika, who is joining us from Rapa Nui. So obviously, we're trying to support her with the connection. Director of the Environmental Directorate of the Municipality of Rapa Nui, active advocate for the environment, and director of the Unit of Environmental Management of the Municipality of Rapa Nui, in charge of presenting the statement of the indigenous people during the plenary session of COP25 in Madrid. We welcome Maruaika, who's now trying to connect. And we also welcome Mark Minewuk, Regional Director for Latin America of Plastic Oceans Chile since June 2017 and Regional Director for Latin America since 2020. Mark Milliwood promotes a Chilean transition towards a circular economy in different working groups and is also a member of the Strategic Committee of the Pact for Plastics in Chile. He works with companies, NGOs, government institutes, and embassies to create a network of collaboration in this transition. He's also a part of the Circular Economy Platform of the Americas. One of the most highlighted aspects in his organization was to promote the recently approved Act on Single-Use Plastics in Chile. Dear Telma, I leave you now to lead this panel on the sea level rise and its effects on the coastal communities. Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon to all participants, and a very special greeting to the panelists, and they will be sharing with us their knowledge, experiences, and probably some expectations. In Portuguese, at least, the word is expectativas for the future, expectations for the future, how to deal with this important matter of sea level rise and its impact on coastal communities. Clearly, this is an extremely relevant topic because coastal communities are more and more exposed to climate change and also to the increase in sea level, high tides, storms, floodings. And many of these communities have already started to implement adaptation measures to face these challenges. However, every measure has its limits. We have the scientific evidence and the special report of the Ipcc on oceans, presentation that we already heard by the President Koff. And this scientific evidence is very concerning, very clear, and worrying because it points out that since 1900s until 1990, the increase, the sea level rise was of 1.5 millimeters a year during that period. And in this short period, since 2005 till 2015, we saw an acceleration. Now we are rising 3.6 millimeters a year. So in addition to the concern for this increase that will continue for hundreds of years, we see a concern for the rate at which is rising. Of course, we said there are needs of adaptation, but one thing is true, and so it's an ambitious adaptation. The combined impact of the hazards such as coastal storms, very high tides will increase abruptly in frequency and this severity of the impact on the low coasts. And if we consider that the coasts host approximately 28% of the world population, including around 11% of these who live in lands of less than 10 meters over sea level, and many of those even live below this, we see the challenges that communities along coastlines will have to face, and also the importance of adaptation measures in order to prevent all of the risks and the impacts that are expected due to floodings and other effects.
So it's also interesting to note that the previous reports from the IPCC had attributed the increase of the sea level towards the thermal expansion of the ocean waters. But today we also add to this effect the melting of the glaciers and polar ice caps, making the situation even more serious. Therefore, we have many important points, and it's clear that during the presentation of the panel members, I believe that we're going to be interested in some related aspects of adaptation measures that are already being implemented, the barriers for the implementation, the difficulties that aren't necessarily technological, and we're here with the hard technologies, the hard measures, such as building of barriers, dikes, and others that are based on nature. So we are hearing a lot of solutions, which I would call options based on nature, and also this concern that these options can be sustained to the needs that parallelly will mean that we can have a very ambitious reduction of the emissions in all sectors of the economy. So these things go hand in hand. And when we see that there are possibilities of nature in helping, yes, it can help a lot, but also it's very vulnerable. And yes, these initiatives can be under threat if we don't parallelly have a reduction that helps us fight global warming, especially much below 2 degrees Celsius, such as what's seen in the IPCC report as 1.5 degrees. So, with this brief introduction, I am happy to invite our panel members, and I'll go in the order. Federico will be the first one, and I believe Federico Isla also has slides to show. Yes, Federico. So, you're also one of the authors of this report from the IPCC on oceans. So it's very appropriate, I believe, even more appropriate than me to talk even more about the subject. Thank you very much, Federico. It's my pleasure. Yes. Can you see the slides on screen? Not yet. Okay, now. The IPCC report was created between 2017 and 2019. It was 4 meetings, on which the first one was Fiji, and I'm going to talk while the slides are placed. The second one is Ecuador, third China, and finally Kazan. So here we converged with people from and researchers from physical scientists, physical geologists, modelers, and from social sciences, geographers, and specialists in research next. What is evident is that the melting of the glaciers is something that we see continuously. And here we see part of this report that where The experiments on the recovery of this, it can be done with new sensors, and effectively, we could see that Greenland is losing its glacier mass, and it's inevitable, and it will melt. And there's some doubts with respect to the ice shelves of Antarctica. But the mountain glaciers, it's very evident. The original report of the IPCC established, as Selma stated, a significant increase of the sea level from this report from 2019. It was projected that for 2100, the expectation at minimum is 40 centimeters more than the current aspect and 80 centimeters in the higher level. There are many discussions in the geological past and it, over the last 6,000 years if the sea level is rising, if it was going up or as is going down as what was proposed for the southern hemisphere. We have beaches, beach areas such as Coronel in Chile, the south of the Biobío, and the plains of Chubut and the Atlantic. So we've seen evidence that there's an active coast and microvariable, such as the coast in Chile and the Mesoparial coast in the north and the Atlantic, where we see the same evidence of beaches that are eroded. Through the IPCC report, we see the trends and they are noteworthy. We've seen we've seen the extensive maps and reports as you see on the screen. The largest one has been Buenos Aires in Rio de la Plata, where there are many effects due to storms, and also it's something that we live towards the east, which is the Pacific Ocean, and it has floods that doesn't just affect the Chileans, but also the Argentinians due to El Nino. And in the registry of Buenos Aires, it's hit hard by the last Nino effects. In 1941, hit Porto Alegre in 1982 and 1997, 98, and El Nino from 2015 and 2016. So these geographies are affected by this amount of water, which is moved from east to west, and it affects the basins in the Atlantic. These are registries of the sea in different ports of the world. Here we have it Callao, Valparaiso, and I think Arequipa next. When we see the fluctuations during the last strong El Nino, such as the one in 1998, here we see 6 basins, which include large and small basins such as Cayai and Yacuy, and the Colorado River Basin. Here you could see how basins that reach the Atlantic receive this large amount of water vapor that's moved through the Pacific and provokes large rains in the basins of South America. So it takes them to the rivers, the Atlantic outpouring towards the sea. Here we see the effects on Paraná, which are seen mainly during the strongest El Niños. We've had very important ones, such as these three during the last 40 years 82, 83, 97, 98, and 2015, 2016. And you could see all the effects it had in Rio de la Plata. What was clear on this IPCC report is that the low-level islands, or those cities at the sea level, are the ones that undoubtedly will have problems due to the increase of the sea level. As we mentioned, it's going to increase 40 to 80 centimeters, and these are the most significant ones where there's going to be no avoidance, and we have to establish tasks for mitigation and for avoiding people being affected. This is a project that we had with university students from Universidad de Concepción to see some effects on the estuaries going to the Pacific Ocean. There's always a relation between the flow area and the sea prisms or the tidal prisms. We wanted to show the effects that it could have in estuaries such as Levo Tuvu, and the last one is Pirua. So we wanted to show images that were before and after. Before the base level changed, this is something that is noteworthy because this empirical relationship shows that when there's large levels of rain, when the base level changes, this is after the earthquake of 2010, and how these can be very significant in the outpouring. So we've had large rains in the south of Biobío in such a way that we're going to have large amounts of water that's going to expand the flow area of the small estuaries, but that is expanding significantly and that are going to cause morphological changes in these estuaries of the Pacific outpourings. Uh, the level of the sea is increasing, and this is due to carbon dioxide and the temperature increases. Nevertheless, we know that there are other greenhouse gases, such as methane, which is not going up in the same way, and therefore it does not behave in the same way as carbon dioxide due to the what is seen by the Mauna Observatory and the atmospheric registries. Another point that has a very good explanation is that even though that there is an increase in carbon dioxide and temperature, we also know that during the 40s and 80s there were drops that is not easy to explain. There's still some doubt on these topics. And to wrap up, I just wanted to show you that we live in an ocean planet where most of the absorption of heat is given by the ocean and the cryosphere. Now we're very interested in our habitable zone and seeing what would happen with Venus, for example, that's closer to the sun and it has a greenhouse gas effect. And the Russians have studied this planet greatly. And this planet is in the habitable zone, but it has a great greenhouse effect. The Well, see that there's great levels of gas, and we've had 3 missions trying to see if there was water previously in some of these planets, and they're searching in the next few days in the Jezero crater, which is a very large crater where we know there was a delta. There's looking for the possibility of seeing, or if they could prove, or if they find the same thing that happened 40 years ago, that 40 years ago when the Viking mission reached it, there was an experiment where they saw the escape of oxygen, and that created large levels of expectation. So there are many unknown factors in the behavior of Earth with respect to its neighbors. The Venus has a greenhouse gas effect and degasification. I want to leave you with some thoughts that is a revolution in planetary science. The Earth has to be analyzed according to its neighbors, Venus and Mars, but today we know that there are other planetary systems. We've discovered 3,500 exoplanets, and we know it's not the same as ours with a yellow sun, a yellow star, with other planetary systems where there can also be planets or areas which are in the habitable zone linked to red stars in such a way that there is an expectation for the study of the planets and to start comparing the Earth with other planets. And we're seeing that there exist other planets that have other planetary systems which are completely different to what we were able to get to know today. Today, we're reaching the limits of the solar system, and that's why we have to compare comparatively what happened with our planet and its neighbors. So we would have to study 3.8 billion years ago. We could look at the craters on the moon, for example, the impact that fell on the Earth over 3.8 billion years ago. The Earth is a very specific planet. It has the tectonic plates and atmosphere. That means that all those craters have disappeared. So we just have remnants of this meteor shower on the moon. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Federico. Very interesting. And clearly, I'm going to look at the moon this night. Look at the moon. You're going to see what happened 3.8 billion years ago. Well, I'm going to ask my grandchildren to do it because he's an enthusiast. He's 9 years old, but he loves the sky, the stars, the planets. It's something very spectacular. So then I'm going to talk with them. Thank you, Federico. And well, thank you for your presentation as well. We also have a good basis with our satellite imaging. I also have seen the loss of mass of the glaciers. For example, do you think this increase that we saw, this increase of 1990 and 1990 in the most recent mass, so it's perhaps due more to the melting of the ice caps or the glaciers? So thermal expansion is slow, right? It could be even due to the melting of the glaciers. It's slow, but the thermostatic expansion is seen the most with El Nino, and it's for the Pacific zones or areas, which is probably going to be explained better by the Chilean oceanographers, but this is where we have thermal expansion. And do we know where we have the most affected regions by the increase of the sea level? Because we know it's not even, it's not uniform. So it's the zones that go down, it's the deltas. So the largest deltas, they have areas in the sea where the bottom of the coastal zones, the deltas, are being compacted. And the communities that are there near the deltas would have to have an adaptation that they could leave these regions, right? The most concerning thing of the 2019 meeting was that we had a meeting where we called experts of various subjects, of various work tables, and it was the low level islands. And these islands where they're going down, these are volcanic islands where they're going down in the territory. And these are fishing communities where you increase the level of the sea, and it restricts the amount of water that they're able to take from the bottom. This is underground water. So these are inviolable in community level, and they're going to have to harvest on other islands.
That is a rather extreme case, but we don't see many other options, correct? Well, we have Salomon, Kiribati Islands, and other islands such as Sri Lanka, many islands where there's more than 1 million people who are affected by that sea level rise in only one country. That is incredible. It is astonishing. Oh, hello, Baro. Welcome to this panel. I'm truly happy that you managed to connect. Thank you. Can we continue then? We had a very interesting discussion. Thank you, Federico. And now we move to Max's presentation. Max also has some slides, don't you, Max? Oh, I think we lost Max. Can we then continue? Are you ready? Are you ready, Vairoa? Yes, I am. I am ready. Always ready, right? All right. So we'll see your slides now. You do have slides. Okay. That's some nice background. Very pretty. It's my office. Will you manage the presentation? Yes, that's the one. Will you let me know or should I just start? Yes, go ahead, please. Iorana Arohanui to everyone here and the presenters, the speakers. To me, this is an honor as Rapa Nui, as a director of the Environment Directorate here, representing our island and our institutions. It's an honor to be here and talk to you. Here you can see some images of the island. I don't know if you've ever been here, but I see some familiar faces. Next one, please. Just to give you some context, the island is 166 square kilometers with 7,750 inhabitants and well, 120,000 tourists a year in a normal year, but now we're all in lockdown due to the pandemic and we use diesel power, and you have 46 of the island that corresponds to a national park. These are the Moais, our national ancestors, and we take care of them. They are part of of the community, our grandfathers and great grandfathers. You see the marine protected areas here with 579,000 square kilometers. Next one. Here you can see the population growth from 2007 till 2017. You can see how much it grew in 10 years. You see those tiny points are the houses in Angaroa with an exponential growth due to the amount of people who are living here, but also due to tourism that has attracted many people from the continent. Obviously, everything that I'm presenting here has an effect. Now, what is the effect? One of those is the growth of our Vai Aori, our landfill. That is the main challenge because we have many other environmental challenges and problems that we're addressing as institution, but this is definitely one of them. This landfill that we have been caring for over 10 years, the proper management of waste, but you can see the estimate according to the amount of people. We are creating over next one, please. 9,360 tons a year. That is with a record that we keep with the trucks. But again, due to climate change, we carried out a study in 2018 about how climate change will affect us with a few forecasts, and you can see the increase of greenhouse gas emissions that will cause an increase in temperature and a decrease in precipitations that we have been seeing for several years now, and the expected impacts. We see a change in extreme events. In the past, well, people don't have the feeling that people don't have the feeling that it's raining less because of the intensity of the rains. And there's an increase in the sea level, and we had waves actually last weeks with waves of 6 meters or more, and uh, they had an impact on the fishing, local fishing, erosion in the oceanic system. The ecosystem, of course, was impacted, and the temperature of the sea. Next one, please. Well, we, as part of this institution, we have a plan that is called Plan Amor, or love in English, with 4 guidelines that provide some guidance for our work, all of the environmental challenges that I just told you about. And these guidelines are self-sustainability of the territory, continuous improvement, resource optimization, respect, and MOA. MOA is respect. We are working in line with these sustainable development goals, and we have we have implemented this at a local level. We are in the process of doing this. This Plan Amor is inspired by the culture of love. We feel that we are part of the environment we value, and we protect our children and our elderly always. That's a part of our culture. We celebrate biodiversity, and that among many others. Next one, please. This is the vision, the Directorate of Environment that I am in charge of. Let me tell you about a few things that we're doing. It is a summary, but the vision is to guide and motivate, promote the individual welfare and their environment through actions with the environment. We have this macro plan. We have a plan within the directorate, and here you can see a few programs that we conduct, like a greenhouse that even in these pandemic times where the authorities or authorities such as the mayor and others closed the island to take care of the community, our health, we took that as an opportunity to promote self-sustainability of the territory. Today, we are creating nurseries for families. We're planting fruit trees, and we're promoting everything that we do on our own with the superfoods that are endemic to the island. We are also, for several years now, we are providing compost kits to families. And we are teaching also about the environment, natural fertilizers, among others. Education is the basis to raise awareness in the community, and from there we take action, but always environmental education is the first step that we take to conduct any activity, any plan that we have. These are the Napo Kehenua program that we are working on several schools and kindergartens. We held our seminar on environmental education yesterday with the sponsorship of the Ministry of the Environment, where we could gather all teachers of the island. Everyone was there, principals, teaching staffs, and I am in charge of the environmental educational network with several local institutions and centers who work with environmental issues. We work in these opportunities to provide updated knowledge on environmental problems and how we're addressing those with scientific studies. So yesterday we held this very interesting and exciting session. We fulfilled the dream because now we have the sponsorship of the ministry, and the teachers were so happy. They learned, and the idea is that they, with their pedagogical experience, can apply this information and transfer it to children. My point is that we are taking many actions and developing many projects in order to address all of these challenges and raise awareness and educating the entire community. Those are the tokehenua, what we build in each one of the schools and kindergartens. We have here images of the Environmental Educational Network. There are some members. We signed our commitment with the environment of the island, and we have our local seal where we can that we can give to all companies with good environmental practices with good waste management or energy efficiency. Also about the sale of local products, we award any company that performs well because the local products don't come wrapped in plastic and helps the circular economy. There's no environmental impact in this local product, so that's why we promote that. There are a few images here. Next one. I think it's stuck, is it? Can you hear me? Are you able to hear me? Because I cannot see the next slide on screen. Okay, there it is. If you want me, I can continue. Yes, please continue. Here you have some of the boxes for recycling that people can use at home. We can move faster now because these are only images that serve as example of our actions. Okay, let us stop here. That is the plant where we stock the recycled material. This is the amount of material that we have sent to the continent. I don't remember, but it's around 700 tons APP. This is the process which we load the plant. We use ships or planes. They reach the continent, and the recycling companies that we are in agreement with process this. This is not an easy process since we have the dengue mosquito and a chikungunya. There's a process where the material needs to be in quarantine and fumigated and sanitized and then sent to the plant. Next one, please. Oh, I think we skipped many interesting pictures, but because we're working with oceanic plastics for several years now, I'm saying 30 years, we are receiving the plastic of the world. We receive plastic from the South Pacific, and I think we'll continue to receive plastics from elsewhere in the world, but we are addressing this as a community, cleaning the coastal line with children, adults in schools. We go and we collect that plastic. We ship it to the continent so that it's recycled, but there's huge amounts of plastic that we receive every day. Here you can see a sample of our cultural events where we maintain many norms, many rules. We do not accept plastic. Single use plastic is forbidden in these events. There's zero tolerance for plastic. In 2018, we held a summit of local governments for climate change. We met with several people here. Next one, please. Of course, reforestation activities that are so relevant. And about what we're discussing with our colleagues, everything that we do on the land has an impact on the sea. So everything's interconnected. If we do not reforest, uh, or the very little soil that we have, everything falls to the ocean. It is just a matter of seeing after a rainfall, it falls into the ocean with our coral reefs being impacted and the flora and fauna in the sea. So we are truly committed. We are conducting many actions, and this is just a summary of some of our plans and how we're mitigating and adapting and becoming active mm, stakeholders within this process, this climate urgency. Next one, please. Yeah, Rapa Nui Maitaki, that is the dream, this clean Rapa Nui, healthy Rapa Nui. And Mama Piru was there, Maururu Yorana. Thank you so much, Vairoa, for showing us that community experience. It's so interesting, and it's a reality because we live in larger urban centers. So it's a very different reality that you're living with less people, but undoubtedly feeling the impact that needs to be dealt with. We can see the situation with the evolution and the coastal line in Rapa Nui. If we take the past 20 years, do you see do you see the changes and the evolution? Speaking of the coastlines, you mentioned about the concern that you have about erosion. Then reforestation, revegetation has an important role to play. But do you feel the pressures on this coastal lines of Rapa Nui? Yes, as I told you last week, we had this event. I don't have the hard data for that. Studies are being conducted to see the effect, but I imagine it's very related to the eclipse. I live up the hill, right in the middle of the island, very far from the town. I live in the countryside. So, truthfully, seeing how the waves impacted the coast was impressive. I'm 36 years old. I've lived in Rapa Nui my whole life. I had never seen something like that. We were so worried, concerned. The idea was to gather as educational network yesterday, and we're meeting with the Mesa del Mar, other institutions who work with these topics to see how we can start to take action. Unfortunately, the houses are not settled right in the coastline, so we didn't see any impacts on families in the community, but we did see that impact on the fishing areas, the fishing coves. So or fishing creeks for people who have their diving centers with their boats. It was truly impressive. I don't have today the hard data to share it with you, but when I do, I can let you know.
So thank you very much. And there are science associations with other institutions, right? So just to Well, if there are any scientific associations with other institutions in this case to further understand global warming, for example, the risks, the impact risks. Well, what we have is an action plan for the climate that has been worked on for many years, since 2016, and it's led by our local authorities. The ARE and others have created the plan, and we're in the process. We've already started a whole program where we, as a municipality and office, will take charge of the educational side. This plan is using the previous study by CR2 in 2018 and the raising of these projections, the change in temperature, the impact on the coastal line, and the impact on the coastal line means that all of our ceremonial centers are threatened. So it's also work that we as an island will tackle this not just through the municipality, but Makenua, which is our indigenous organization that takes charge of the whole national park. It takes care of our ceremonial centers, not just there, but also CANAF leading this plan. And the idea is that we're awaiting the financing to be able to carry out all these actions. Climate change today is a priority, and we see that we're covering all these plans and all of these according to what is being affected. Thank you very much. And I'd like to take full advantage of these opportunities for the questions. Good luck and everything. So then, Max, I believe that you're back. You have your presentation. Yes, I'm back. So I'm not going to talk about any presentation yet, so it doesn't freeze again. But I'm in a hotel in Panama right now. So thank you very much for your time. I'm going to refer to a few topics that are related to the decisions that you've made. Also, I'm very happy to have, well, Yurana, a friend from Rapa Nui, because it's an island that, in particular, has a very, well, I'm very linked to this island because I work on these marine protected areas that she was mentioning. And also, I'd like to say that the island of Rapa Nui, which some people call the belly button of the world or the navel of the world. It's one of the most important areas in marine conservation today, and that leads the marine conservation efforts with more than 720,000 square kilometers of protected areas around it. So it's shown in Latin America as the largest area in Latin America and the Americas. So then, if we say that the topic that calls us is a topic that is complex and global and is of great care and attention every time we obtain information, it shows how the increase of the level of the sea is affecting, in particular, the coastal zones. And these coastal zones are something that hold, as was said before, an important proportion of the population. So it's said even that the first 100 kilometers of the coast have around 50% of, or 40, 50% of the population of the planet. Out of the 10 mega cities, 8 of them are found in coastal zones. So the effects that can be produced are very important for human health and for, obviously, the expense, the investment that is not a minor one. Right now, I'm in Panama. I'm in front of the sea in the zone which is called the the coastal area of the city, which is at a very low level. It's a place where the sea is at a few meters, and the infrastructure in general of Panama is at that level, at that pier level, where it concentrates 99% of the highest skyscrapers of Latin America. So when the city of Panama receives the effects directly of the rising sea levels, obviously that investment, be it private and public, are going to be affected greatly. So then the question is also, how can we respond to that equation in the long term? This is something that was shown in the previous presentations that also has to do with how we have a vision of the future where we must keep in mind the benefits that are not so evident, and perhaps just because they're seen less, they're not as valued. And this has to do with what we call nature-based solutions. So we know, for example, that many of these structures that are naturally formed, the mangroves that I can see here and that are in view, or the same algae forests, are also important barriers that will allow us, if, such as a kelp, to protect the environment. Also, public policies that help us or do not help us are even making these coastal sectors even more vulnerable, eliminating and destroying or losing the benefits of the natural capacities of helping us in these crisis situations. We know that these structures are able to defend us from important large processes. And as we saw before by our colleague from Rapa Nui, well, I was very impressed by the images in areas where I was walking through were completely underwater. They've hit the shipments and the ships, and even with these problems, they were completely hit by the sea and the sea level. So then, the effects are being seen today. They're obvious, especially there's been a discussion that I hope is decisive on the validity of the evidence and that there's no doubt that this is happening. Specifically, some of these sectors have been hit and that had been mentioned before are zones that are specifically isolated and that also they contain human populations that are very vulnerable and that also have to adapt with a greater speed. So also Maldives and Fiji also have been affected, and the Kiribati government has purchased land in Fiji to be able to move their people in a determined moment. So it's not just the effect of the sea and the effect on the structure and the physical effect, which is what happens in Rapa Nui and other areas, but in Kiribati we see this increase of the sea level due to the rising temperatures, and other factors are going to produce waves that even cover the underground water stream. So those populations that leave on this island will not be able to live there anymore because the waters that contained that island will be salt water and therefore not potable anymore. So we see the distribution of populations, people that will have to leave some areas, redistributed to other areas to be able to have safety and a future for their families. Nature probably has some of the greatest solutions, and this is one of the interesting factors. We saw a tweet once that there was an invitation to look for solutions for climate change, and it was said in one of the tweets, they're called trees. Elon Musk made a tweet. Elon Musk made this contest and called for these tweets, and somebody tweeted, they're called trees, let's plant more of them. So we see that nature has greater capacity than any long-term innovation we can have, or even the medium term. Today, all of the capacities that nature has, such as in the maintenance of that structure, those places, the population, and the limits of the planet are key. And if we lose them, we're going to finally lose many of the benefits and possibilities that were invisible for a lot of people. And this is directly related to where we place our money and not just our discourse. So it's important there to see that the measures that can be taken today can affect that future and those benefits. The fishing subsidies, the creation of marine protected areas, these are some of the subjects that I need to cover, and also the protection of areas such as the Antarctica. We know that the Antarctic ice shelves are the ones that are producing water the most, that are directly increasing the level of the sea. And this has a direct relation because Antarctica is one of the zones that is affected the most by the climate change and also by the increase in temperature. And at the same time, there's this increase in the sea level, and it creates a negative circle or vicious circle that produces even more fresh water. So here we have to talk about our political decisions and policies and how they have a direct effect. We've mentioned subsidies, subsidies towards fishing. How many of these subsidies effectively go towards giant industries that in the end are making these fish that in one way or another can keep playing a role in the ecosystem and the cycle of carbon in the sea are being extracted not because of food health, but just due to profit and large profit. So how do we have these discussions in stopping the advancement of aquaculture, such as shrimp farms and others, so that they do not continue destroying ecosystems that are in particular important and that are true refuges for biodiversity and that are mitigating the climate effects so that we can have perhaps places that can rebound or provide once again a source of biodiversity for the planet. These are issues and topics that we have to link. So, climate change and the advancement, the increase of the sea is one of the effects, but also it's one of the effects that we have to have complete knowledge on and that we have to link to our daily political decisions, daily political and economical decisions, because when we make those decisions, we have a direct effect on the future possibilities, not just ours, but also for our children, grandchildren, and many, many other forms of life in the future. Thank you very much. Thank you, Max. Very interesting. Well, you said some interesting things. I always think that politicians, governments don't take immediate action because the effects, the risks, they're not necessarily so deterministic. These are projections and they're not going to be immediate. So then they always put this not as a priority, but something to work on in the future, specifically in developing countries, because there's not enough funds. Now, the necessary investments for these are not, as you would say, simple. These are large. These are large. So I'm concerned about this that could be more political and how we could really carry out investments from that point of view, in particular of these coastal zones, which are so vulnerable. And also, I would think that, well, you mentioned solutions such as the preference for natural solutions or based on nature. I like those, and there it does sound personal, but solutions aren't necessarily are always solutions. They have to happen in a synergy. For example, I'm very concerned about the vulnerability of the natural ecosystems. The mangroves, I'm worried about the forests. These are very vulnerable to all of this. So, how long lasting are the solutions based on nature if there are no great efforts in having climate change be a low level? This is one of the greatest concerns that I have. That it seems that people want solutions that are cost effective, but I don't believe they are. I don't think they are. It's a mistake to think of them that way. But I can therefore say, do you think that the hybrid measures, searching for an adaptation, would they not be less vulnerable? For example, if we work with hard measures, barriers, how do you also see the effect of the investments for developing countries? Right, there is an interesting part of the OECD report, and it stated that less than 1% of its of the developed countries' investments go to marine conservation. So it's not just a problem for developing countries, it's also a global problem, and the investments continue to be focused on extraction. But fairly, I'm in agreement, and what we need to look for are a series of diverse solutions, so diverse as the diversity itself that exists. Many times when I work in marine protected areas, which are a tool for climate change, but they're not the panacea, they're not the magical solution or the silver bullet. So we do require other actions that have to do with investment, coastal investment, infrastructure investment, which has to do with the incentive towards fishing, artisanal fishing, reforestation, or other actions. These actions have to be all considered. And I like what you mentioned, the opportunities, because at the end of the day, these are the opportunities. They're not things, they're not permanent or immovable. And the climate change is happening so fast that what we're going to need are quicker reactions to that constant change in reality. And that's, well, we're going to try to perhaps try to cover the sun with just a finger, so to say. It's so instead of that, we don't just need a short term political solution. Governments are usually elected just for a short term because they have to be state long term policies. And this is much more difficult. And on the other hand, we as human beings have this limited capacity of seeing many options at the same time. And we tend to always concentrate on a unique one. So, this is part of the evolution of knowledge and the understanding of this new process that we're living through. I don't have the answer, but in one way or another, I believe it really shows what we need to continue discussing. Yes, thank you very much.
Now we're going to move to our last presentation. Is it Mark's? Mark's? Just Mark. Just Mark. Oh, so it's Mark. I see that you are there with a very interesting title, The Blue Communities. Yes, the blue communities. That's right. Do you have a PowerPoint presentation? Yes, but I will point out when I need the first one because the first segment, it'll be just me talking to the camera. All right. Thank you, Telma. Thanks to the IPCC and Fundación Medi for the invitation, and also thanks to the audience that are taking the time to be here. Thanks to Federico Bairoa and Max for their interesting presentations. I think I am now, well, actually, many things that I've already heard will reflect my presentation today, but it's good that we are aligned. And sometimes the plastic oceans, well, my organization is the Plastic Oceans and is, of course, addressing this problem, but the root of the problem is the same. That is a result of the human activity. We live in a system that produce and consume, and it's broken. It's a broken system that has not changed since the Industrial Revolution over 260 years ago. We produce, we consume, and there's no tomorrow. It's a this idea that we have unlimited resources, that no responsibility for the adverse events that this consumer model brings. And there's also a very important disconnection that I've heard in other presentations between the human being and their natural environment that we depend on 100%, but we believe that we're separate from it. So we are seeing now the negative effects every day around the world and also in Chile. If the root of the problem is the same, the broken system, then the solutions should also have a common factor, according to my vision, and that is the will to generate changes or the lack of will to make the changes. We know that there are several stakeholders working in solving the problem. We've listened to a few, the civil society representatives, governments, companies, scientists, obviously, are doing their part as well with their hard data, showing what's truly happening around the world and what's going to happen if we do nothing, because we're not only seeing the problems of today and the solutions for today's problems, well, we also need to know and prepare for what's coming in 2050, 2100. So all of those groups, all of those stakeholders in isolation are working just like that in isolation. So we need to make a change because the impacts of climate change and the plastic pollution require of a more comprehensive, integral changes. And we see the impacts on the sea level rise, plastic pollution, and how that affects biodiversity, climate, and the same infrastructure that is under threat, and the quality of life of people. So we need to understand that all of these systems are intertwined, interconnected, the ecosystems, but also the economic systems. So we see the environmental problems, and in this, in this civil society, only makes us believe that we can think of the most expensive, the most technological solutions, and sometimes make us think that our uh, individual efforts are worthless. The pandemic has shown us that sometimes the more technological, more expensive solutions are the better. We have small efforts that can make a difference, and using the example of this pandemic, washing our hands, keeping social distance, not getting together in large groups. That is a personal effort, personal actions, and that have been the most effective and unquestioned solutions. But I don't want to take more of these valuable minutes that I have left to present the blue communities program. So I would like to start with the first slide. Here you can see the first image in a community in Cartagena in Colombia, where I think the text says everything. Ecosystem is your topic, is your system. It's everyone's issue. This Blue Communities project was born out of the necessity of our Plastic Oceans organization to give our support to communities where we are working on and making sure that we're doing long-term work, not so incidental work, because sometimes we speak to people, but normally we have a more strategic long-term plan and we couldn't get to a good solution. So what in Blue Community, we accompany local organizations, we support their actions, we connect them with other experts, we create new projects with them, we give them microfunding for specific projects, and we hope to create a dynamic network of Blue communities globally. So working with these global local allies, we realized that many of their individual efforts that seem to be very local, many are within their communities, but these individual efforts were having a very large impact in their communities, but outside their communities, nobody had heard of them and not of their problems either. So listen to Varoa and their plan called Amor. I think that was a fantastic example. That was a local action, but why not everyone else should find out about it? So we need to accelerate and amplify those local actions at a global level. And talking to this panel today is relevant because this is where we can tell these stories. So after working with these communities, the concept for Blue communities came out, and we thought that we could and should act locally, but to accelerate the change at a global level. So in Blue Communities, we work with organizations, local allies under the concept of equal relations. This is, we're not going to go to a community, approach a community and tell them how to do their work and impose our projects. The idea is to listen to our local partners, and based on what they do and their ambitions, we start working together. Hopefully in the near future, in some future, if they want to implement our projects, would be very willing to do it. That that we work to generate social and environmental changes and hopefully circular economy related projects. So with the Blue Communities project, we started with 3 communities in 2020, and now we have 14 communities around the world and around 20 organizations. And we hope that by the end of the year, we have integrated between 50 and 100 communities. So listening to another panelist yesterday in this event, someone said there's time to talk and there's time to act. We know what the solutions are, but for many years we have lacked the sense of urgency in the communities. And where we work with the Blue communities, there's already an urgency like yesterday. So there was the will also to work within the community to solve their problems. So I want to ask you to imagine a river. I don't think it's that hard. Just imagine a river, but now imagine a river with no water. Please, next one. Because that is a reality. That is the reality of one of our Blue communities in Cameroon, Douala. This is a waterless river filled with plastic bottles because Douala City, the capital of Cameroon, does not have a proper waste management system. So our local ally, the leader of the organization, is named Elvis, and that's the reality. That is the reality of a city of 2.5 million people, and our local ally, Elvis, cleans that river twice a month, cleaning tons and tons of garbage. But also he restores ecosystem. He's cleaning the local lake, planting on mangroves because there are problems due to the kelp contamination, kelp pollution, and they see the destruction of the habitat. So he's also educating the community about sustainability. But just imagine that this river that leaves the city ends up in the ocean. First of all, in the present, that that garbage actually gets to the ocean. But imagine when there's a sea level rise. Now, what happens to that everyday garbage? That is an additional concern that our local allies are not even facing now. They're only facing with the problems that you see on their daily basis. But what what was mentioned at the beginning, and also what is appears on the report, the necessary adaptations for the sea level rise type of, sometimes this hard or soft types of measures or protections for the blue communities and organizations that we work with. I see many possibilities more than in the area of soft and restoration of ecosystems, for example, because that is local knowledge that you find already. That's ancestral ancient knowledge existing for hundreds and thousands of years, and the costs are infinitely like way less than the big investments that are needed for other projects. So we have here another example is from Santa Marta, Colombia, in Sierra Nevada. And speaking of ancestral knowledge, where we work here in Santa Marta, we work with an organization, Santa Perla and La Sierra Artist Residency, and they work precisely, among others, with an indigenous people called Los Arhuacos. And that those people have a very close relationship with nature. They are convinced that balance, the balance of humanity, lies in the respect for other beings, not only humans, and also among the different cultures, but not only human cultures, but the cultures in nature as well. So I think that with blue communities, we're not only trying to mitigate the problems that we're generating with our way of production and consumption, and the pollution of the environment and restoration of the environment, but we're also restoring cultures. And if we do nothing, if we don't give them a voice, precisely what they can teach us will also be lost. So I think it's truly important that we not forget the cultural aspect and the ancestral education where we can learn. Next slide, please. Another community that we work with here within Alappuzha, India, with several organizations, among them a social one called Greenworms, and founder has created over 320 job positions and processed tons of plastic only in his district. So what do we do with the environment and what do we do in communities? We're not only here protecting nature and ecosystems, we're also creating dignified work, honest work, and better life quality for people, and working, developing the districts, but again, in balance with our natural surroundings. Here you can see a picture of another project of ours in Campeche. I don't know if you can read it, but it says Terry Turtle Nest Zone. This is a sign painted by the members of the community. This is a protected area. They felt that the need to restore and protect their own environments. We work there with two organizations, one of them led by Luis, uh, and they have a project in with beaches because these are an important place for turtles. But not only they're protecting turtles, but they're also cleaning up the beaches and working in the restoration of mangroves. They educate children, again coming back to education, educate, educate, educate. That is key. And also showing the community that by educating and protecting their own natural surroundings, they will create employment and better life qualities. And hopefully through Blue Communities, we can show again to the world that individual or smaller efforts have a large impact. Healthy ecosystem. This is another picture of the turtle project in Campeche, in Mexico. A healthy ecosystem requires support of everyone, but mainly passionate leaders such as Luis to continue their work and broaden the scope of their work, because in the end what he does is giving an example of the need to protect our environment. His struggle is very hard. it, he's showing that is protecting our home. That is the most important. And going back to the Blue Communities project, just to wrap up, currently we are working in a platform where all of our local allies that are currently 20 can communicate among them and know about each other's projects, some sort of local project library, so that we can then, and it'll be easier for us, define certain metrics with which we can show the rest of the world the impact of these local projects. I can continue speaking about the amazing work that they're doing in every blue community, but I would like to bridge to the IPCC and its report, because I think it's very comprehensive and the conclusions and advice are truly relevant. I believe that it's necessary for this report, at least the executive report, uh, be on the night tables of every decision maker in every city, in political decision makers and companies decision makers. But I would like to include chapters that with the examples of these local examples, because these are real cases that are living the same scenarios that the IPCC report is showing, maybe for 2050, 2100, but there are communities around the world that are already living these consequences. So we cannot keep waiting uh, because, oh, there's many years left for 2100, but because for some communities that reality is happening now. Now, I would like to invite you to know more about the Blue Communities project through the QR code that you can scan with your smartphone. If you place it in front of your screen, you scan it and it leads you to the Blue Communities website. And if you're interested, or if you live in a community or work in an organization and you think that you could be a potential Blue community, please write to us. You'll find our email account right there, chile@plasticoceans.org. And hopefully we can add more, so much more Blue communities around the world and in Latin America. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mark. That was very interesting. I have a point in this report and the assessment that we'll have about the working groups. You'll see some study cases. There are already experiences, because we are adding more examples, and we are already strengthening this report with examples, as you mentioned. But we have 1 minute. But I have a question. What do they do with the bottles that were collected in India? What do they do with so many bottles in that river? Well, that is precisely the local uh, work that our partner is doing, precisely creating social companies to create employment around the recycling of these water bottles, because recycling won't be the solution for all of the plastic in the world. We know that. But for this specific local cases, we need to find entrepreneurship. There's technology to process these bottles and at least give them a second use, give this material a second life. But clearly not just by recycling those bottles will be enough. We need to change the entire consumption system in the places where Elvis works. And the last question that I have,
So, so how much of this depends on the government for its maintenance? Well, look, in general, it depends more of the intentions of local governments, the municipalities themselves, that impose certain local ordinances that can stop that type of pollution, and that obviously on the national level there is legislation to forbid certain products or promote local economies. I also, again, believe it's important to have those types of examples like Vallaroa, which we're looking for the communities to have local changes to generate a transition towards a consumption and difference. But this requires will, a lot of vision, and a lot of goodwill. Right then, thank you. Well, I think I would continue for hours, of course. I'm having such a good time and talking about so many good things. So I talked with the organizers and they said, no, no, we have so many questions. And I believe that also we're out of time, but I'm sure that we've advanced a lot in knowledge, especially for those initiatives and experiences. So I would just have to thank each one of you, first of all, for accepting the invitation and also for bringing in so much information to such a great discussion, such a rich discussion. And I'm very informal, so I really like to have an informal talk with everybody. So I'm Brazilian, right? So it's what I prefer. So well, there's no way of correcting this. So Federico, we're going to look at the moon this night. I'll be there looking forward to seeing the moon and thinking of our event. And once again, thanking each one of you for the excellent panel we've had. So then, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. I'd like to thank everybody and for leading the panel, especially on the rising sea level. And everybody will be looking at the moon at night, as Thelma said. So we're going to take a 5-minute break to later continue with this final day. And in the last panel of the IPCC, we're going to come back with a crucial panel on climate change, which is governance, with Ralph Chami, Marcelo Mena, Nacheli Valencia from Mexico, Julio Cordano, and moderated by Patricia Morales Razuriz, General Manager of Fundación Meri. 5 minutes.